Now this week, chapter 8, we have even a more specific look at the dream, focusing on the Medes and Persian Empire and its successor, the Kingdom of Greece. So, from this point now, most of Daniel's prophecies are things from his time period have not yet come, but from our time period have already happened. But we will get into things even at the end of this chapter of events that even haven't occurred up to present day. And so we have to believe as Daniel, as the Lord showed him those other prophecies, accurate, his continued prophecies about the future, and maybe not too distant future, will come to pass too. And so we'll begin reading the first 4 verses of Daniel chapter 8. In the 3rd year of the reign of King Belshazzar, a vision appeared unto me, even unto me, Daniel, after that which appeared unto me at the first. Chapter 7, when we began last week, said in the 1st year of Belshazzar. So this is just 2 years later after the dream last week. And I saw in a vision, and it came to pass when I saw that I was at Shushan in the palace, which is in the province of Elam. And I saw in a vision, and I was by the river Ulai. Then I lifted up mine eyes and saw, and behold, there stood before the river a ram which had 2 horns, and the 2 horns were high, but one was higher than the other, and the higher came up last. I saw the ram pushing westward and northward and southward, so that no beast might stand before him, neither was there any that could deliver out of his hand, but he did according to his will, and became great. All right, let's do our little summary again here. Use our different colors here. There was I'll do it just small one. There was a statue, remember, chapter 2. And last week, we had the 4 beasts. It was the lion, the bear, do bear black. A little bit more bottom, and a leopard. We'll do him, make him more like a cat. If you ever notice a lion or a cat or a leopard, they all creep up, they still look just like a cat, they do the same thing. And then finally, there was the unknown beast with 10 horns, all right? This is chapter 2, this is chapter 7 last week, and now chapter 8, still playing with my colors here, Linda. All right, we had a ram, trying to think how to draw a ram. Well, usually they have horns like this coming from the side. This said it had 1 horn bigger than the other. This is a front view, we'll say here. You're looking at the ram. That's not my best work. But say you're looking at it head on. It's getting ready to charge. 1 horn bigger than the other. And again, that's signifying something. So 2 years after the dream in the first chapter, 1 horn is higher than the other. This is a repetitive theme on this double empire of the Medes and the Persians. In this chapter, this is showing that Persia is greater than the Medes. Let's go back last week, chapter 7, verse 5. And behold, another beast, the second like to a bear, and it raised up itself on one side, and it had 3 ribs in the mouth of it between its teeth. So raising up on one side meant one empire of those double empires was greater than the other. And here we are in chapter 8, and it's emphasizing it again with 1 horn bigger than the other. So re-emphasizing the greater of one of the 2 empires, and Daniel will serve under both of them. So we'll label them now again too. Mede, Persians. This is Darius, Lion's Den king. We'll say Lion's Den. And this is Persian, Cyrus. And this is Decree. rebuild Jerusalem. So that's how maybe you can remember those names: Cyrus, Darius. And as we see, as we finish out these chapters, Daniel will list names of each of these kings, or he was under each of them, and then show influence them. All right, continue reading verses 5 to 8. 1 to point again. So this is back to the statue. This is middle silver arms, 2 arms representing Medes and Persians from chapter 2. 5 to 8. And I was considering, behold, a he-goat came from the west on the face of the whole earth, and touched not the ground, and the goat had a notable horn between his eyes. And he came to the ram that had 2 horns, which I had seen standing before the river, and ran into him in the fury of his power. And I saw him come close unto the ram, and he was moved with choler against him, and smote the ram, and brake his 2 horns, and there was no power in the ram to stand before him, but he cast him down to the ground, and stamped upon him, and there was none that could deliver the ram out of his hand. Therefore that he-goat waxed very great, and when he was strong, the great horn was broken, and for it came up 4 notable ones toward the 4 winds of heaven. So, after the ram comes the he-goat. All right. Again, we're having different animals, but referring to the same thing. So the goat here is referring to the bear last week, or the ram, sorry. And now we've got a goat. I'm trying to draw a goat here. Horns look a little bit more different this way. Little beard here. He's charging, so I make him look mad. And he's coming. Of course, these are all symbolic. This isn't a giant. It looks more like his belly. I've made more like a pig there. But anyway, so the goat is coming towards the ram. Greece is coming to take out the Medo-Persian Empire. Greece followed there. That's the middle section. That's the brass section of the statue back in chapter 2. So Daniel's having repeated themes. So, who is the goat? The term goat now is used, if those of you who follow sports, it used to mean if you like screwed up or choked, he was the GOAT. Now GOAT stands for something, greatest of all time, G-O-A-T. They'll say Michael Jordan was the GOAT in basketball, or Tom Brady is the GOAT in football, or Babe Ruth was the GOAT in baseball. So this is a real goat symbol. We'll talk a little bit more about that goat in a minute. But what he does, it talks about how he charges and takes out this empire. So what does this mean? He conquers the Medo-Persian Empire and is annexed in succession. Once again, this refers back to Daniel 2, the next in the statues, and last week, Daniel 7:6. Let me read briefly. 7 verse 6. After this I beheld, and lo, another like a leopard, which had upon the back of it 4 wings of a fowl. The beast had also 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. So the number 4 there. And here we read about this in verse 8. The great horn was broken, and for it came up 4 notable ones toward the 4 winds of heaven. So this is speaking to something specifically that would happen here. It is referring to Alexander the Great. As we mentioned last week, he conquered the world before 30 and was dead at 32, and then his kingdom was divided into 4. So this is a specific prophecy of Daniel, and this is about the year 548 BC. So, he's prophesied about Greece here, or he interpreted Daniel's dream. And then, last week, chapter 7, Greece is the leopard, 4 heads, 4 feathers, representing that the kingdom will be divided into 4. And now he's the goat who will take out the ram, Medo-Persian, and that 4 is used again, and that 4 is representing the kingdom divided into 4. Now, what's so amazing about that is Daniel is writing this well over 100 years before it ever happened. So I thought of an example. Suppose you read a book on, a basic summary of World War II, how Hitler came to power in Germany, and then the Japanese Empire in the West, and how, German invaded Europe, Japan bombed us, and there was a war in Europe, war in the Pacific, and all that stuff, and you read it, and so that was an interesting summary. And then you look, and the book was written in 1776, the year our country was founded. That's basically the equivalent of what Daniel's doing. He's telling the future of the mightiest leader of the earth at this time, Alexander the Great, probably before his grandfather, great-grandfather had even been born. So what do scholars do with this? If they're liberal, they say Daniel wasn't written in 500 BC. It was written later after all these things came to pass. Because one, they doubt the supernatural ability of the book. I guess they doubt God, for if we believe in God, He knows all things. He knows the future, and something tomorrow or 1,000 years from now or 1,000 years ago is no different from Him. So God could have revealed this to Daniel, and we believe He did, and He wrote it down, forecasting the events that were going to, which are still in the future from where He was, although to this time point it hadn't happened. Now we will come to an event next month that is without a doubt written after or written before the event happened, Daniel chapter 9 in the 70 weeks. But this week we'll say to this area. So we believe God is all powerful. He knows all things, and He is able to reveal to Daniel the things that are about to happen on the face of the earth. All right, continue reading. We're going to read 9 through 14. And out of one of them came forth a little horn, which waxed exceeding great toward the south, and toward the east, and toward the pleasant land, one of the four that the goat was divided into. And it waxed great even to the host of heaven, and it cast down some of the hosts and of the stars to the ground, and stamped upon them. Yea, he magnified himself even to the prince of the hosts, and by him the daily sacrifice was taken away, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down. And a host was given him against the daily sacrifice by reason of transgression, and it came down the truth to the ground, and it practiced and prospered. A lot of technical language here, but I'll try to explain something here in a minute. Then I heard one saint speaking, and another saint said unto that certain saint which spake, How long shall the vision concerning the daily sacrifices and the transgression of desolation, to give both the sanctuary and the host to be trodden under foot? And he said unto me, Unto 2,300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed. So when I was going over this week, I said, okay, I got a little bit of studying here. What does this mean? What are they saying here? In those 6 verses that I just read, I came across 2 interpretations. One is that this is referring to the future reign of the Antichrist. But I think the more believable, the more one that I'll hold to, and the more popular, is that it's talking about a ruler who would come out of one of these 4 divisions of his empire. I don't know if any of you heard the name when I listened to it. His name was Antiochus Epiphanes, or Antiochus IV. He persecuted the Jews, killed multiple ones of it, and I'm sure you've heard, if you don't know the name, you've heard of his act. He offered a blasphemous sacrifice on the altar in the temple. He went to the temple and erected a statue of Zeus, the Greek god, and then he offered a pig, which was unclean in the Old Testament, on the altar. So I was thinking to myself, all right, I'm anxious to see what this guy's fate was. I said, because he's done some awful things right here. Now, this is all during such things, you might have heard these terms, the Maccabean revolt, and the Hanukkah that the Jewish people celebrate around Christmas time, or the Festival of Lights. It was during this time period. I think the oil was almost out, but it continued to burn 2 or 3 days, and so it was during this time, and during this tyrant, Antiochus IV, that all these events occurred. So just another little side note, there's 7 feasts given to the Jewish people in the Old Testament, and then there were 2 added, the Feast of Purim with Queen Esther that Ray talked about Wednesday night, and this Hanukkah, which come as a result of this Maccabean revolt. This is like in the 100s BC, so about 150 years before Jesus was born. So this is what Daniel is talking about here. This has led some people, like I said, to conclude this is referring to the Antichrist, but it really, because he did so many specific things here, I really believe it's talking about Antiochus Epiphanes, and I read about what happened to him not long after he did this. He died a horrible death. It's not hard to imagine. Figure that's really, he was really pushing it, going too far by, it's one thing to fight against God's people, another thing to blaspheme and to set up a statue into the actual temple and the holy altar and sacrificing a pig there. So, and his death was quite painful. As I was reading about it, it was similar to one of the Old Testament kings that I don't know if you remember reading about. I remember one that said he wouldn't repent, and it said he died slowly over 2 years, and eventually his bowels came out of his system. So it's you don't want a bad place to be in open rebellion and unrepentant towards God. We have a loving and forgiving God, but eventually, that ends if you're showing no sign of repentance. So that's what I think this is talking about here. This continued, one of the four, follow trajectory. One is taken away to Babylon, line. Then, when the writing was on the wall, that meant the Medes and the Persians, the bear, represented by two horns. Persia is greater than the Medes. Then next is the thighs of brass, which is Greece, represented by the leopard. And last chapter, represented by the goat here. Each of them, both times, have four things coming out from them, representing the four kingdoms. And this Antiochus Epiphanes, he is, and out of them came forth a little horn, which we'll use that term later. So this is taking us up into almost the time of the Romans, and getting closer to the time Jesus came to earth. All right, continue reading. 15 to 19. And it came to pass, when even I, Daniel, had seen the vision and sought for the meaning, then behold, there stood before me as the appearance of a man. And I heard a man's voice between the banks of Ulai, which called and said, Gabriel, make this man to understand the vision. I believe this is the first time Gabriel's mentioned in the Bible here, although he's mentioned several other times afterwards. So he came near where I stood, and when he came, I was afraid, and fell upon my face. But he said unto me, Understand, O son of man, for at the time of the end shall be the vision. Now as he was speaking with me, I was in a deep sleep on my face toward the ground, but he touched me and set me upright. And he said, Behold, I will make thee know what shall be in the last end of the indignation, for at the time appointed the end shall be. So Gabriel's now appeared unto Daniel. What we're describing here was Daniel's sleep. Is it just a dream? Is he actually carried off into a place? He's having some kind of a vision. Sounds similar to the one John is having when he had Revelation, and Daniel and Revelation go together so much. And as I mentioned, I think this is the first time Gabriel is mentioned. Really, there are only two angels, mentioned by name as far as serving the Lord: Gabriel, the messenger, and Michael, the archangel. We have the name Lucifer given, that some think refer to Satan, and then Apollyon in Revelation talks about an angel over a pit. But as far as righteous or good angels, only the names of Gabriel and Michael are mentioned. I've heard of several other names, like I think one's Raphael. I don't know if they're in like the Apocrypha or books, and they're not in our Bible. As far as our Bible, as far as serving the Lord, only Gabriel and Michael are mentioned by name. When Daniel has this vision, he's in awe here, and it reminded me back to our Revelation course in the very last chapter, Revelation in the book of the Bible, when John sees this vision. He said, Then saith unto me, see thou, verse 8, I'm sorry. And I, John, saw these things and heard them, and when I heard and seen, I fell down to worship before the feet of the angel which showed me these things. And he then saith unto me, See thou do it not, for I am thy fellow servant. So, like Daniel, John, they were in awe when the Lord is giving them this vision. So how is the Lord doing it? God can do anything. Is he just taking him away? Maybe taking him to the future in 3D, and he's seeing all these things happen around him. Whatever the case, Daniel's in awe about the things that are about to occur. And as I think this is kind of a turning point in the chapter, up to now chapter 7, chapter 8 are talking about current empires during Daniel's time. And towards the end of chapter 8, we're going to be talking about perhaps the future reign of an Antichrist that hasn't occurred yet. One more verse I want to read, verse 20. And he says it, If there's any doubts, the ram which thou sawest having two horns are the kings of Media and Persia. So it says it clearly there. This ram in verse 3 and 4 is clearly said to be Media and Persia. It was a bear last week. And in the two arms of silver in chapter 2, this is the empire that is currently ruling, that is about to rule as Daniel's writing this vision. Daniel said this is the 3rd year of King Belshazzar. So that's right at the end of the Babylonian Empire, and the Medo-Persia Empire is about to rise up next at the time that Daniel was writing this. So like I said, about 548 BC. So let's close out this chapter. And I think we're having to look now more into the future events, even future from our point here, as we go into the rest of the book. Verses 21 through 26 I want to read. And the rough goat is the king of Grecia, and the great horn that is between his eyes is the first king. That's Alexander the Great. Now that being broken, whereas 4 stood up for it, 4 kingdoms shall stand up out of all the nation, but not in his power. So Alexander the Great was the he-goat. When he died, this is all history too, his kingdom was divided into 4. And in the latter times, this is where I think we have a jump here, of their kingdom, where the transgressors are come to the full, a king of fierce countenance and understanding, dark sentences shall stand up. And his power shall be mighty, but not by his own power. And he shall destroy wonderfully, and shall prosper and practice, and shall destroy the mighty and the holy people. And through his policy also he shall cause craft to prosper in his hand, and he shall magnify himself in his heart. And by peace shall destroy many. He shall also stand up against the prince of princes, but he shall be broken without hand. And the vision of the evening and the morning which was told is true. Wherefore shut thou up the vision, for it shall be for many days. All right, a couple things to look at here. The first two verses here again refer to the kingdom of Greece and Alexander the Great at the beginning of this. Remember, this is a couple hundred years before he's ever born or comes to power. And I also wanted to note something else out. Daniel was writing this in the 500 BCs. Alexander the Great comes to power in the 300 BCs. But I've been reading this study book Roland Landon let me borrow about Daniel. Let me just read this to you as I read Daniel 8 and 5. The he-goat was the acknowledged symbol of Greece many years after Daniel had been given this vision. The goat was chosen as a symbol of the Grecian Empire. Coronis, the first king, sought a new habitation for a new capital to be built in Macedonia. He was advised by an oracle to take goats for guides. He saw a herd of goats fleeing from a storm, followed them to Odessa, and built the seat of his empire called Agade, the goat's people. Coronis chose a goat as the emblem of his standards. Aegea is how you spell it, I'm not sure how you pronounce it, became the bearing place of Macedonian kings. In fact, Alexander the Great called his son Alexander Agus, which Alexander the goat. So Bible prophecy was fulfilled to the letter when it speaks of the goat that came from the west on the face of the whole earth. It is speaking of the part of the earth that pertained to Alexander's conquest. When it used the term touch not the ground, it is speaking of such a great speed that the goat was actually flying, hence symbolized by the leopard with 4 rings in Daniel's first vision, which just shows how quick he conquered. So what am I saying here? Greeks chose the goat for their symbol, and Daniel was writing about the goat a couple hundred years before it was happening. This is saying maybe someone in the 1500s, maybe around the time of Martin Luther or John Calvin wrote, and I saw a great eagle rising out of Britain and conquering another land and ruling the world. You know, eagle, we would think of the United States, only he's saying in advance. This is what Daniel's saying here when he's talking about the goat, and Greece would take the symbol of a goat. Another example shown of Bible prophecy and the supernatural content of this book, and how the Lord is revealing to Daniel what was about to occur. When we moved into verse 23 that we just read, I believe, like I said, this is the Antichrist, and there are examples in the Bible where we have prophecies of the Lord's first and second coming in the same passage, and there's basically no division. Some have assigned this to the Antiochus that when we talked about, who offered the sacrifice in the temple. But I view this as the Antichrist. When it says he will oppose the Prince of Princes, it seems like he's coming against the Lord and his people specifically, which is the Messiah. And it also says, it says in the King James, for it shall be for many days, or in my NASB it says it pertains to many days in the future. The time Daniel was writing this, I guess you could look at that as many days. The time of Antiochus was 300 or 400 years away, but I'm thinking by many days it's referring to the last days. So it's kind of setting up the stage that all these rulers that we've had in this book, Nebuchadnezzar, Belshazzar, Cyrus, Darius, talking about Alexander the Great, Antiochus, they all have like a spirit inside of them that has something like some Antichrist attributes, but this is talking about the one at the end who will have all these attributes and wickedness in the last days. As Daniel was writing this, the Babylonian Empire is about to collapse. The Medes and the Persians are about to come up to the scene next, and the kingdom of Greece would arise fairly recently. So I believe the person they're talking about here is not from any of these kingdoms, but a future ruler or dictator. Let's get another color here. Who will come out of this Roman Empire, one of these 10 toes or 10 kingdoms in the last days, and we'll begin to talk about those in the next few weeks as we close out Daniel. So one more verse. What is Daniel's reaction to this? And I, Daniel, fainted and was sick. Certain days afterward I rose up and did the king's business, and I was astonished at the vision, but none understood it. So even Daniel, who wrote the vision, when he got it, did not understand all things. It closed with this final verse, and it's very similar to the last verse of chapter 7. If you want to look over there, that was verse 28. It says, hitherto is the end of the matter. As for me, Daniel, my cogitations much troubled me, and my countenance changed in me, but I kept the matter in my heart. So these are dramatic experiences, amazing, written down and recorded by Daniel, but also they're so, awesome and awe-inspiring that almost literally makes him sick to see, the history of the world unfold, and they have a profound effect upon him. The Lord chose him specifically for this. He's probably a middle-aged to 50s or 60-year-old man now, but the Lord's using him to basically write down and unfold the history of the future of the world from that time period on for God's people, the Jews, and eventually for us, the church, where we use this book. So this is how this 8th chapter closes out. So this is good because I've always read Daniel and had a general idea of what's in there, but this is kind of helping me learn too. And these repetitive themes really seem to pinpoint, and for the most part, we as conservatives from our background or evangelical or Pentecostal have always heard this order, but it seems to make sense. It seems to repeat itself. So the order is, the statue represents Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, the iron legs are Rome, and the 10 toes are 10 future kingdoms. Then chapter 7 is re-emphasized. The lion is Babylon, the first one. The bear is Medo-Persia. The bear leans on one side, and we'll see why in a moment. Leopard with 4 heads, 4 feathers. That's Greece, the next one. Then the awful beast, Rome, or a future empire that comes from Rome. This week we had the sheep, or the ram, and the goats. So a ram is a male sheep. The ram has 2 horns. One horn is bigger than the other. Bear, one side leans toward the other, and 2 arms here. One, the Persians are greater than the Medes. Then comes the goat next. Goat symbolized, which will be the symbol that Greece will take many years later. Rises quickly. Alexander the Great conquers the Medo-Persians. So here's Greece here. Thighs of brass, leopard, 4 heads, 4 feathers. What does that describe? 4 kingdoms that will come out of Greece, and one of those 4, Antiochus Epiphanes, will desecrate the temple. So there's all this pattern here, and through the first 8 chapters, it seems to be, following a fairly consistent pattern. Now, when we go into next week, it'll be somewhat later in Daniel's life. It'll be the reign of Darius. That's the one who put him in the lion's den. And we're going to be talking about several things, several visions he's having. And one of the most interesting, as chapter 9 closes out, Daniel's 70 weeks, where we get the tribulation, and a really almost a pinpoint prophecy when Jesus will come, when Jesus came to earth for the first time. Almost the exact time period from which Daniel will give in this book. So I think that's all I have for chapter 8 here. Quite amazing, dramatic, and finally even overwhelming for Daniel as he's seeing all these things and recording them. So, with that, anyone have any questions on this?
Yeah, from the Babylonian Empire to the Grecian Empire, what is the time frame?
So Daniel is carried off when he's a teenager, I think around 600.
600.
He's getting this vision around 550, and that's right at the end of Babylonian. I believe Greece is like the middle 300s. So this is probably 250 years.
250. Well, it doesn't give us much time to the end because we're working down to legs now, and it seems
Yeah.
Yeah.
So here's almost, if you go with this is couple hundred years about each.
Yeah.
300 or 400 years for Rome, and then kind of an indefinite period as you get to the 10 toes. Now some in Christianity say all this has been fulfilled at our time period, but I don't believe it has. And as we'll get into things into the in these final 4 chapters, there's things that have yet to come.
Where did you read about what was it, Antonius?
Antiochus.
Antiochus.
I think I just clicked on Wikipedia or something.
Okay.
It listed
Okay.
this is the tradition how he died. It was pretty bad, and it was not long after he set up that statue
I was
in the
wondering
temple.
if you got it out of the Book of Martyrs or not.
No.
Okay.
Why do you think that nothing talks about Hitler? I would think that would be one of the worst periods of time for the Jewish people.
Yeah. Well, here's one of the reasons I thought this might not address to Daniel, but when Jesus says in Matthew 24, when he's telling about the end times, he says in there. Well, I'll begin with verse 15. When you therefore shall see the abomination of desolation, we'll talk about that next week, spoken by Daniel the prophet, stand in the holy place, whoso readeth, let him understand. Then something that is talking about, or they can't be talking about Antiochus, because Jesus is now in the 1st century afterwards. Then let them be in Judea, flee into the mountains. Let him which is on the housetop not come down to take anything out of his house. Neither let him which is in the field return back to take his clothes. And woe unto them that are with child and are nursing in those days. But pray that your flight be not in the winter, neither on the Sabbath. We've always heard that. That means when this event occurs, it'll be so bad, don't even go back and pack your clothes, get out of there. And then Jesus makes a phrase, for then shall be great tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of the world to this time, no, nor ever shall be. Some people say this was fulfilled in AD 70, when Jerusalem was destroyed about 40 years after Jesus was saying this. But if that was the case, Jesus is saying, you know, what occurs here will never be equaled again. What occurred in AD 70 has been equal. World War II was by far the worst thing to them. So the only point I was making, this kind of points to the fact that AD 70 was bad. What happened with Hitler and the Jews was bad, but nothing will compare to the tribulation. So what Jesus is saying, before the time of his coming, it'll be the worst time in the history of the world. That's what I read from here. For then shall be great tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of the world to this time, no, nor ever shall be. Any other thoughts? All right. We'll close in prayer. Lord, we thank you for this lesson today. Thank you for you, Lord. You know the future. You reveal it to your servants. Lord, help us just to be faithful to, as we live in the present, to live for others, live for you, and to tell them the way to make heaven as their home. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.